It's Veritas Forum with Dr. Craig Johnson, Professor in Residence of Chalcedon Christian Academy and Pastor of Bethel Christian Fellowship in Agora Hills.
Welcome to the Veritas Forum. My name is Craig Johnson. My guest is James Patrick Holding, President of Tecton Apologetics, author of Shattering the Christ Myth. Welcome, JP. It's good to have you on the program again.
Thank you, Craig. Good to be here.
Last program we were talking about the Jesus myth presentation. Give us a little background again. What is the Jesus myth that's being propounded nowadays?
The Jesus myth is essentially the idea that Jesus did not exist at all, not even as a human who walked the earth, let alone as the incarnate Son of God. And this is simply the easiest and best way, as far as many skeptics of Christianity are concerned, to answer all those questions about whether Jesus rose from the dead or was the Son of God. If he didn't exist, you don't have to worry about those things.
So in your book, Shattering the Christ Myth, which deals specifically with this presentation, they have a silence theory. What is the silence theory?
The silence theory looks at the New Testament letters, the epistles of Paul, Peter, and the others, and it says that because they do not mention certain aspects of the life of Jesus, such as being born of Joseph and Mary as his putative parents, because he doesn't mention that he lived in Bethlehem and Golgotha, or was crucified at Golgotha, therefore he did not live on earth and did not exist as a person on earth.
So they make a list of all the things that are not mentioned in the epistles, and they conclude from that,
yes, that Jesus did not exist on earth, but rather was some sort of spiritual being in heaven. And that was where he was crucified and where he died and was raised from the dead.
Now this view is being popularized in the modern media. In Religulous, Bill Maher's film.
Religulous has alluded to the Christ myth very briefly.
The Zeitgeist film?
The Zeitgeist film has alluded to it as well. It has a major portion on it. 1/3 of the film is devoted to it.
And what about The God Who Wasn't There?
The God Who Wasn't There was a film in 2006 that heavily promoted the Christ myth theory.
So in the Zeitgeist film, they begin with the claims that of the copycat thesis that Christianity is just, Jesus is one of many virgin-born with 12 disciples, born December 25th, dying and resurrecting gods, and they just throw out a number of names.
Yes, they have a long roster of pagan gods that they say were sources for the life of Jesus.
So the silence theory says that he never even he didn't exist at all because of the epistles don't mention the gospel facts. And then they go further by saying, which we're going to be talking about in this program, the copycat dimension of the Christ myth. What's the copycat thesis?
Copycat thesis simply says that Jesus did not exist, but his story was made up by readings of the stories of pagan gods. And they said, well, this looks like a good element to put for the life of Jesus, let's use that. Now, I should point out that the silence thesis and the copycat thesis are not necessarily mutually exclusive, although typically the proponent of one will not offer the other as well. They can be put together. A couple of people have put the two theories together and used both of them in their arsenal.
So become the enemy for just a minute, and there you go, growl, and just throw out what they're saying.
Okay.
They're saying Mithra.
Okay. They'll pick a pagan god, and Mithra is probably the most popular. So let's indeed start with that one. I receive more hits on my website for the article on Mithra than for any other article. I mean, there are at least 2,000 people a month reading my article on Mithra as a pagan copycat Christ. So this is a good one to start with. Just give some sample claims here. They will say Mithra was born of a virgin on December 25th. They will say he had 12 disciples. They will say that he died, was resurrected after 3 days after being put in a tomb. And one of my favorites is that 1 Corinthians, the verse in Corinthians where Paul speaks of the rock that was Christ, they'll say that that verse appears in the Mithraic scriptures, except that Mithra's name is used instead of Christ. That's one of my favorite claims.
So there's Mithra, and then there's Dionysus,
Dionysus,
and then there's Dionysus, then there's Horus, the Egyptian connection,
Osiris
there. So let's go back to Mithra. Mithraism, Mithra. Which Mithra are they talking about?
Let's talk a little bit about that, because the study of Mithra is a very intriguing field. There are actually two incarnations of Mithra we need to talk about. There was an incarnation in his very early stages, go as far back as 1400 BC, in which he was the lord of the contract, basically. He was the guy who went around enforcing contracts, and if you didn't live up to your contract, he'd come swooping in on his chariot and kick your tail. And then there was another incarnation of Mithra, which was during the Roman era, And there was a lot of discussion over the years by scholars of Mithra as to how those two types of Mithraism were related. And the more recent thought is they're really not related at all. But in the Roman incarnation, it was more of a mystery religion. So you went in and did some rites, and that is how you achieved salvation. And Mithra in the Roman incarnation is depicted slaying a cosmic bull. And there's all kinds of theories about what exactly this meant in the Mithric studies literature. But basically all agree that it is a picture of the god Mithra astride the constellation of Taurus, slaying the bull. And what exactly that means, again, is open to debate. But that's what Mithraism in the Roman times was all about.
So the claims are, what about the claim? Mithra, oh, just another dying and resurrecting God. What was Mithra born of a virgin?
Okay. No, absolutely not. In neither incarnation, whether the early Persian one or the Roman one, was he born of a virgin. He was born out of a solid rock as an adult. Now, I guess you could say that that rock was a virgin, but so is that chair you're sitting on, okay? I mean, if you want to define virgin that loosely, you can say he was born of a virgin. But there was no woman who was a virgin that he was born from. There's no such thing as that.
So a strange birth or origination. What, did he have 12 disciples?
He did not have 12 disciples. In fact, this came, I had to trace the source of this claim. There is a carving showing Mithra inside 12 pictures of what look like people. And some of these copycat theorists said, oh, those must be his disciples. They're actually the signs of the zodiac. They aren't his disciples. And this carving, at any rate, was some 200 years after Jesus lived. So it obviously provides no evidence.
So who's borrowing from who?
No, I don't think one borrowed from the other at all. I think Jesus got the idea for 12 disciples from the 12 tribes of Israel. They were supposed to represent the 12 tribes. And we can see that alluded to in the Gospels. You will sit judging the 12 tribes of Israel, right? So
was he born on the 25th of December?
I found nothing to suggest that he was born on the 25th of December. Now, Jesus was not born on the 25th of December that we know of.
Yes.
So that's really beside the point anyway. Now, there was a celebration associated with Mithra on the 25th of December.
A solstice celebration?
Yeah, the solstice. A lot of pagan religions celebrate on that day. It's kind of like everyone has a sale on Christmas. That's what it was. That's a good analogy for it.
Was Mithra crucified?
Mithra was not only not crucified, he never even died. It was great. I found this quote from a Mithraic scholar. He wasn't even addressing this issue, but he said clearly, there is no death of Mithras. He never died. He killed the bull, but he never died himself. And of course, if he didn't die, he obviously didn't rise from the dead.
So he didn't
either.
rise from the dead on the third day?
He did not rise from the third day or the fifth day or any other day.
So where are they getting this material? Are they inventing it out of whole cloth?
Yeah, I've never bothered to actually trace down some of their claims in many cases, but I know where they're getting a lot of it from. They're getting it from 19th century skeptics who, for all I know, did make this up. Now, if you ever want to read some of these people, take a chill pill before you do, because you're going to be going for the loony bin before too long with some of these people. There's people like Kersey Graves is the name of one of them. There's others like Gerald Massey. And their works are like, I like to say, they're as hard to find as a two-headed chicken and as normal as one as well. As you can read this stuff, if you ever tried to chase down some of their documentation, a lot of it is over in Europe somewhere. You're not going to be able to do that here in America. But even my friends over in Europe have a hard time picking up some of these claims. And you can never find any of this stuff. Or it's from some other source that's no better than they are.
And so the Roman incarnation of Mithra we're talking about well after the time of Christ. We're talking about later.
Well, the Roman incarnation of Mithra probably started somewhat earlier than Jesus, but most of the data that they use to try and claim parallels, such as that carving I mentioned, are from after the time of Jesus. Mm-hmm. And let me talk, I want to talk now about that favorite one of mine, the parallel in Corinthians, where it says, it's just like this in the Mithraic scriptures. Mm-hmm. Well, I don't know where they got Mithraic scriptures from, maybe off of eBay or something. But see, the leading Mithraic scholar right now, a fellow named David Ulansey, is quite clear. We do not have any Mithraic scriptures left from their time. They're not even sure that they had scriptures. So many people were illiterate at the time, like 90% of the population. They may have simply transmitted their teachings orally. But what it amounts to is we don't have any Mithraic scriptures. So I'm thinking, I'd sure like to ask this guy, where did you find this copy of the Mithraic scriptures? You need to tell the leading expert on Mithraism that you have these in your possession. Stop keeping them in your garage. let the experts know.
Let's go on. Mm-hmm. Some more copycat claims.
Okay. The second most popular one, in terms of the traffic I get, is the Egyptian deity Osiris. Okay, now this one was like in the 1400s, earlier BC, so there's no issue where we can say, well, that postdates Jesus. But let me give you an example of how they'll abuse Osiris as a pagan copycat Christ. They will say that he died and was resurrected. Okay, and that's the one that's the biggest parallel for them. Now, what you find, though, when you look into Osiris and what happened to him, yes, he did die. What had happened to him is that he had been attacked by an enemy, and his body had been chopped up into several pieces, over a dozen pieces. And then what happened is the deity Isis, his wife, came looking for the pieces, put them all back together, and then Osiris became the leader in the realm of the dead. He became the judge of the dead. Now here's what's critical about this. Number one, he did not come back to life. He was dead. He was still dead even after he was pieced together. Number two, these people will use the word resurrected to describe what I just told you about. Now, what is a resurrection, properly speaking? We use the word resurrection a lot to describe people coming back to life. We use it to say, well, this guy was given CPR and he was resurrected. We use it to refer to Michael Jackson in Thriller, you know, coming up as a zombie. Properly defined, a resurrection means what happened to Jesus. It means he came back to life in a glorified body, animated by God's Holy Spirit. Correct? Okay. Does that sound anything like what happened to Osiris? Not in the least. What happened with Osiris was related to a characteristic of the Egyptian gods, where their bodies were impervious to harm. You could chop them up at will and then put them back together, just like some kind of Frankenstein Lego set. There's this real funny story of how some of these gods were like plucking their eyes out and giving them to each other. And this one Egyptian god had a headache, and another Egyptian god said, "Here, you can use my head till your headache goes away."
And so this is equated to Christianity.
Yeah, this is not resurrection. Yeah, equivocation of terms, especially the terms resurrection and salvation, very popular along the pagan copycat crowd. Salvation is another one. Let's talk. You want to talk about
Yes,
that one?
talk
Okay.
about that.
Now, the word salvation in the time of Jesus, we're used to thinking of salvation as an exclusively Christian term. But in the time of Jesus, salvation was used of rescue from any difficult situation. If your house got on fire here, the firemen came in and carried you out on the street, saved your life, they would have called him your Savior. Okay? And you can see there's no religious connotation to that whatsoever. It's simply a practical connotation. He saved you. Guy saves green stamps. No, he's not really a savior of green stamps, no. But any rescue from a difficult situation, especially including religious context, but not exclusively to religious context, was considered salvation. And so when they see a pagan deity says, he saved us, he offered us salvation, that just means he rescued us from some difficult situation. It doesn't have anything to specifically do with the Christian doctrine of salvation and atonement. But they will use a term like salvation in a very general sense to say, see, this guy was a savior, this guy was a savior. There's a parallel.
Osiris, Horus, virgin born, December 25th,
No.
have 12 disciples,
No.
died on a cross,
No.
rose from the dead.
In many cases, all I can say is some of these is no evidence, period. Yeah, when we were talking about Mithra, I at least found something they could have drawn it from and misinterpreted. In the case of many of these guys, with the particular claims you talked about, I can't even find anything close. I mean, another fellow did the research on Osiris before I did, and on Horus. He could find maybe a group of 4 disciples for one of those guys. Okay, he couldn't find. Yeah, and the case of virgin born, well, Horus was definitely not virgin born. In fact, there's a scene in Egyptian mythology showing Osiris and Isis quite clearly having sexual intercourse, although at the time Osiris is dead. But nevertheless, it's clearly not virginity